The board meeting continues on KTRS.
7:38 here, Big 550 KTRS. We got Ed Martin, we got Jane Duker, and Chad Garrison. Chad, what do you want to talk about?
Let's talk about what's going on in Pine Lawn yesterday with the municipal courts, and some protesters showed up, and here I think Pine Lawn is one of the most egregious of these little microburbs that are issuing court fines and tickets. And yesterday, the demonstrators showed up and they pretty much shut down the court. They did, they were able to prosecute a few people, but I think that in this situation, I think that these demonstrators are actually on the right track here as far as targeting some of these other communities that are really going after people and really are burdening the community and people who can't pay. There's an example of a woman there who got picked up in a sobriety checkpoint. She wasn't drunk, but she had a existing warrant. She was in jail for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, eating nothing but peanut butter sandwiches because of a warrant for, I think it was some type of traffic citation. But
well, I think that they should probably deal with the Pine Lawn police chief, who has defended the actions of the Pine Lawn police.
Right, and the irony of that.
And the irony of that is Jane Duker. Thank you. I have too many women on my mind. Jane Duker. Who was the Pine? Who was
supposed to think about that?
Who was the Pine Lawn police chief?
It's Anthony Gray.
And who is Anthony Gray?
He's the attorney for Michael Brown's family.
Right. So these people who were complaining about being thrown in jail for 3 weeks are being thrown in jail by the police chief.
Profiling and abuse of police power.
And he's the attorney for Michael Brown's family.
So at least I give the the protesters and the demonstrators at least credit for the fact that they went up there anyway, and are calling this out. But people do need to realize, and again, it brings out sort of this North County cadre of, it's all the same lawyers, same people who are sort of doing these courts. And so, but you need to do it evenly and say, look, let's look at all the courts. And it wasn't just Ferguson. There were, there are other places that need to be looked at, and this is one of them. And, but
how is this not a bigger story? How does Anthony Gray go on Meet the Press with Chuck Todd and talk about how the police are over the top and how things need to change? And he's a police chief.
I'm not sure that one national outlet has ever made the connection between Anthony Gray and Pine Lawn and some of the other things that go on up in North County. And I think that's a shame.
Ed Martin, how is that possible?
Look, I think Ferguson is a very difficult, in many ways, a sad occurrence. There's lots to it, but one of the things is extraordinary number of people who seem to be credible when they have had no scrutiny. Anthony Gray is one. I think again, depending on who you talk to on many of these cases, the facts that came out were not the facts, right? And they were put out and they were counted on and they were reported and they went racing forward and were regrouping. And Anthony Gray, again, we're back to the full circle of Brian Williams' story. I don't know what we do when we have a failure of what has been for 100+ years journalism to get to the bottom of these things. And I'm not criticizing. I'm actually saying it's difficult to do when you have few reporters and you have news agencies that are just using AP stories and all that. It's just
but where's the editorial on that? Seriously. Well, I'd like to see the editorial to say that, by the way, what's going on in North County, there are, African American people who are part of this system. It's not like this system came about solely because of white people. And I think that, that needs to be, that we can't have a valid discussion on race if we don't have at least all the facts about what's happening, how it's happening, and who's where and who's doing what.
But also the same problem occurs in towns and cities that are mixed race and mostly Caucasian. South County's got little towns where they lots of tickets and all kinds of things, and the heightened scrutiny of it is all good. We should be checking the problems of these tickets and fines and what it leads to. But I don't think that part of it is a racial thing. I thought we were talking about the lack of credibility of some of these leaders. Al Sharpton comes in to lead this protest. The guy's as uncredible source
but
on something.
But Al Sharpton comes in to talk about police brutality with Anthony Gray standing behind him.
Exactly.
And Anthony Gray is throwing people in jail for 3 weeks because they had a taillight out.
And the only problem I know in your mind is
ridiculous.
And if you recall, Anthony Gray was the one. There was a shooting in Pine Lawn at the time, near the time of the Michael Brown shooting.
Right.
White officer, black, victim.
Right.
And actually participated in the fact that this went to St. Louis County for investigation and Bob McCullough for prosecution.
Yes.
I think it's a valid, criticism to say, now, wait a minute, Bob McCullough, is the villain of all time and he's the worst prosecutor and he can't ever, investigate a shooting involving a white officer and a black defendant or a black victim. And yet at the same time Michael Brown was going on, he was referring a case over there.
Yeah.
That's fair to talk.
That's ridiculous. Hold on, let Chad get in here.
Yeah. It's not about race here. I mean, it's about these impoverished communities, and they have this system in place where they can they can employ themselves. I mean, they don't need all these. They don't need these governments. They don't need these mayors. They don't need the council members. Some of these council members up there make several $100s a month for a couple hours worth of work,
and they win by 14 votes.
Oh yeah,
and
nobody
it's like
votes.
their street.
But it's this sort of mafia, where
But Chad, I think back to McGraw's point. I don't think it's about the community. It's in this point, because when the leadership that stands up and says, "Help us be leaders on changing things," are Al Sharpton and Anthony Gray. Pretty quickly, the rest of the public says to themselves, "These people aren't credible. There's conflict of interest." It would be the same thing if they were two Caucasian guys. And the real question, I think, McGraw, you want to get to is, why don't we have a real scrutiny of people like Al Sharpton? There are credible African-American leaders who can make a difference and can be liberal. I don't mind the liberal part, but the President of the United States uses Al Sharpton for his advice on race, and Al Sharpton uses Anthony Gray, and we're supposed to look up and say, these people are concerned with the community? It doesn't pass the smell test.
And it's been well documented that there are Fortune 500 companies that pay Al Sharpton money to say, you know what, leave us alone. Leave us out of this argument. Here's our money. Don't bother us. Go bother somebody else. So he's taking money not to make a stink at certain companies.
Right.
So what type of civil rights leader is that?
I think that's the bigger question, because you're not going to have a critical. You don't have to like Charlie Dooley in all of his positions, but Charlie Dooley was someone who was in the community, engaged in the community, trying to figure stuff out, imperfectly or not. That was an African-American leader that seemed you could have.
But I also call out the protesters too, because if the protesters, they should know better. They're protesting Pine Lawn while the police chief is the attorney for Michael Brown's family.
Well, no,
they should be the ones who should be calling this out.
Well, I actually agree that they should protest because it is an abusive place, but they need to, you and I, can say, oh, this traffic abuse isn't racial. Well, that's how the discussion started, was that it was racial profiling, and I do think that there is some of that goes on, and it has to be addressed. So, that's why I say this is all part of this conversation, and the fact that, we've evolved on this discussion is good, because I think, as the facts come out, people's positions evolve. So, I'm glad that the protesters call it out, but they need to be honest about, who's in charge over there.
Well, and there is a tremendous amount of hypocrisy on the part of Anthony Gray, it would seem, to be prosecuting these people. I think he's the prosecutor. Is he
was the prosecutor. He's now the police chief, and his title is like Director of Public Information or Director of Public Safety, which in essence is the police chief of Pine Lawn.
Right.
All right.
And he told us on the show that he gave up being prosecutor so he could be the police chief. He's also I want to say he's a prosecutor for another town.
Yeah, I think he is.
Yeah, that's what I mean. There's a certain number of people that sort of have all the judgeships.
Right. Could you imagine if Bob McCullough was the police chief of Kirkwood, right, and the prosecuting attorney for the county, right? I mean, it's just ridiculous. All right, Chad Garrison, Jane Duker, Ed Martin. We'll come back and wrap things up. Have our parting shots. That's 9:46 on the Big 550 KTRS and KPLR 11.2.
This is McGraw Live on KPLR 11.2, STLtoday.com, and the Big 550 KTRS.